Day 1006 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 732,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,610 in the past day. Then as for hardware losses, 6 tanks, 27 APVs, and 22 artillery. Values which are, generally speaking, lower than average, with winter on its way, where this season tends to mark the beginning of both a figurative and literal freeze to the front lines, as it impacts mobility and movements on the ground, though it's not exactly the case just yet, with a great deal of fluidity still found on the map. Then as for a quick ruble exchange rate update, as of today, the exchange rate stands at 103.94 rubles for every $1 US. Noting that the Russian government will do everything they can to try to prevent the ruble from devaluing. Those measures include halting or limiting international payments and exchanges of the ruble for other currencies, or purchasing of its own currency using foreign reserves to increase demand, or increasing the already high interest rates set by their central bank. All examples of which that are becoming quite exhausted. But don't just take my word for it, that's what the RCB chair and the Russian pollies are saying themselves. Then straight to the Russian map, because in a devastating overnight assault in various regions, Ukrainian drones targeted a major fuel depot and oil refinery facility in Kaluga, igniting a massive inferno that raged into the morning and could be seen from miles away. Despite local authorities claiming all of the drones were intercepted, thick smoke and fires told a much different story. Reports also indicate that a strike not far away from here impacted the Typhoon plant, which is a key player in Russia's military-industrial sector that produces a whole range of technical equipment. Although, given that we see Russian soldiers time and time again being atrociously under-equipped, or when they are, it's then sometimes by means of extremely vintage Soviet gear like a 70-year-old signal flash lamp. And this one such example was for their frontline units as well. So I'm guessing that the Typhoon plant produces very little, and what it does produce, it sends to the third line of defense, followed by pocketing the rest of its funding. But I digress. Because as for this latest significant incident in Kaluga, hitting the oil infrastructure, Russia has once again failed to protect its crucial oil assets, thereby increasing the cost of Putin's war. Then also overnight, reports of more ATACMS missile strikes, reported this time at the Kursk airfield. And then in a similar vein, but following up to the previous day's updates, it's now been reported that not just an S-400 radar in Kursk has been destroyed by the previous ATACMS strikes, but that event now also includes 2 launchers of the battery getting wiped out. Golly. The S-400 is Russia's best chance at a defense against the short-range ATACMS ballistic missile threats, but even then, S-400s are not an ideal method of defense against them, because you want a system that's much more optimized for the intercepting of such missiles. But the few they truly have are working as Kremlin defenses. Then on the map, we head internationally as a Russian Sukhoi Superjet 100, a Russian version of a light passenger aircraft, was arriving from Sochi into the Antalya airport of Turkey, where it caught fire upon landing, with a malfunction causing an engine to set alight. No casualties were reported, but this incident raises concerns, especially given the aircraft's troubling history with past incidents. And so, due to sanctions imposed on Russia for Western passenger aircraft since the Ukraine invasion, Russian civil aviation now has a much higher reliance on these type of Russian-manufactured aircraft. But even that doesn't help them too much, because this so-called superjet is, or was, powered by 2 French power jets, the French engines that have since fallen under those sanctions, making the maintenance and replacement of engines rather difficult, which is part of a broader pattern that's rapidly accelerating across their entire aviation sector. And so, although it's not quite apparent as to the cause of this latest accident, although a forcibly increased service life and lack of maintenance might have something to do with it, just look at them now, flaming up an international airport outside of their own country. So hopefully the local and international civil aviation authority bodies will have a field day when it comes to allowing these increasingly unsafe, non-compliant Russian jets to enter their airspace, knowing full well that these problems will only multiply in the coming years. Then headed into the Ukrainian map today as Russian forces crossed the Oskil River south of Novomlinsk, positioning themselves against a Ukrainian brigade, where the Russian forces are located in this forested area. Now, it's an unusual approach given the river's width, with a notable lack of bridges, very few to use in order to sustain an offensive like this, thereby causing a reliance on pontoons, which takes a great deal of work to set up and maintain. And it is difficult to say if Russian forces have any real intentions here. You certainly cannot rule out this being a feint attack, as a means of being a deliberate and deceptive maneuver designed to mislead the AFU about the true nature of the main assault. So it's always difficult to grapple with Russian logic, but there is a very strong case to be made that these resources could be much better spent, expended, if you will, in their ongoing quest to capture Kupiansk. Then headed just southeast of this location as Ukraine reportedly broke through and recaptured an area near Koliznikivka, which is in the main western front of Kharkiv, near in the Oskil River. And then southeast of there, as AFU fighters from the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade cleared Kupanki in the same Kharkiv region, reclaiming the area from partial Russian occupation. The map hasn't updated yet, where it's looked like this, as it does now, for about a month. And so in the process of this latest development, the AFU captured 7 Russian servicemen when taking back the town. Then nearby, the Ukrainian tank crew from the Rybuz brigade attacked Russian positions in the adjacent Luhansk region. No specification as to where, but realistically this can only be one of 2 spots, either along this 25-kilometer front, or at this 10-kilometer Bilorivka front. Then headed down the map with activity still ongoing at Chasiv Yar, as Russian forces continue their highly attritional north and south offensives into the town, with, most recently, 3 Russian infantry fighting vehicles that can be seen destroyed and smouldering, not long after a bit of snowfall as well. So it's been a very active northeast sector of the map in the last day, but also followed by a reasonable amount of activity in the south, as take for instance a Ukrainian heavy drone of the Baba Yaga type targets and destroys a Russian infantry fighting vehicle. Quite difficult to discern what this vehicle type is without its turret, and most of its top layer for that matter, presumably a BMP. Then, also in the east, a Ukrainian drone successfully targets and permanently decommissions a Russian tank. Red marks the spot right there. Then also, we saw another destroyed air defense system of the armed forces of Russia, this time a Buk M2 system somewhere on the front, or I would expect 40 to 50 kilometers behind the front lines, as these are the medium-range surface-to-air missile systems, where you see right here the visible chassis, the missile rails and launch arms, and radar equipment remnants. Then also on the map, Ukrainian forces successfully destroyed a Russian BM-27 Uragan MLRS system, the multiple launch rocket systems, this one happening in the Kherson region. Then headed across to some news today, with the first news piece important to highlight, because Deputy Foreign Minister of the Russian Federation, Andrei Rudenko, told state media news outlet TASS that North Korea's arms supplies to Ukraine will completely destroy relations between Seoul and Moscow, as if they hadn't already been pretty much destroyed. And with Rudenko also stating that Russia will respond decisively to any such actions related to South Korea providing the military aid to Ukraine. So first of all, that's some of the most incredible double standards seen right there, as Russia gets artillery munition supplies and something like up to 40% of their ballistic missiles used in Ukraine from North Korea, which is really quite strange when you think about it. Russia's military is clearly showing some lack there. Then secondly for this, we again see Russia wielding its greatest weapon of all time, the threat, the Russian threat. And now extending those threats to South Korea, which in many ways is a world away geographically for Russia, even though of course their far, far east briefly connects with North Korea. And so given that 45 sovereign nations around the globe have, in one form or another, provided lethal military assistance to Ukraine, then why would country number 46 of South Korea get Russia all hot and bothered under the collar? Well, it's because the threats come from a position of fear. They're scared. Because South Korea can pose a significant threat to Russia, what with its 70 plus years of military buildup and munitions stockpiles stemming directly from the aftermath of the Korean War in the 50s. Where South Korea now boasts one of the most advanced and capable militaries globally, producing highly regarded weapons, not the least of which is tanks, artillery, and missiles. In fact, it may completely surprise you to know that, or not surprise you in the slightest, that South Korea is ranked 5th in the global military strength rankings among 145 countries, according to Global Firepower's annual index. So when we look beyond the words, we start to see where the fear comes from within the Kremlin, as anyone else in this developing position would be a bit concerned too. Then to some Ukrainian hardware news, as Ukraine's UAV strike potential has expanded to 2,000 kilometers, as per the recent comments from the main Directorate of Intelligence of Ukraine's MOD, so think Bordenov. Here we see one of Ukraine's Lutyi drones, already known to exceed 1,000 kilometers as seen in previous strikes. Now, about 9 months ago, Ukraine did state they would have UAV attack drones capable of reaching 2,000 kilometers and beyond by December this year, making it potentially right on schedule. So with these latest developments, and best to move to the map for this one, as although most of Russia's strategic bombers used for the firing of their aviation-launched missiles into Ukraine are located anywhere between 600 to 900 kilometers away from Ukraine, there is one exception, Murmansk, bordering Finland and Norway, where Russia's strike aircraft are positioned at an airfield some 1,800 kilometers away. So this new Ukrainian longer-range UAV strike capability could create a significant inflection point in this war, unlike Russia's recent use of their Oreshnik ballistic missile, which made no difference in terms of range, payload, and certainly not precision, amounting to being only used as something of a scare tactic in sending a message to create some perceived threat of nuclear strikes, which would only ever be met with a death sentence for the Kremlin, were they to ever act on these types of threats. Then to head across to a really quick funny to round it all off for today, guys. So everybody's favorite Russian top propagandist, Syolivov, has gone on a bit of a rant most recently about the devaluing of the ruble. Concerned about the exchange rate and likely the falling value of his own ruble bank account, he goes on to blame the Russian State Duma members and the Russian Central Bank, which are all extensions of the Kremlin and Putin as far as this case is concerned. But he was also upset by all of the foreign countries, as he said, that are laughing at Russia about this devaluing of the currency. And so through all of the rant, he attempts to pass the blame about this issue upon everybody in Russia that he can think of. Except of course for the wildly obvious causes for these concerns in the first place, because of the little guy at the top, little Putin. It's kind of hard to fix a problem when you don't address the underlying cause of it in the first place. In a sentence, that's our Russia. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like, comment, subscribe if not already, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!